Good morning, everyone, and we're here today with Dr. Bill Werner of the Center for the Study of Political Islam. He can be found at politicalislam.com. Politicalislam.com is a resource, a resource with many writings and links to videos on the history, 1400 years of Islamic expansion. You'll also find linkages at politicalislam.com to his many books that he's authored, which are available as downloads online. You'll find his Facebook account there, links to his Twitter feed, Google Plus, as well as his YouTube channel. It's a tremendous resource for learning all about how political Islam has subjugated civilizations for 1400 years. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And Dr. Werner, thank you so much for joining us again today. We're, of course, in the third month of the lockdown here in Minnesota, and we had meant to have an online event with you today, but really grateful for you to take the time to meet and answer some questions which have been written by at least 20 different people in the area. They had many questions for you last time, and they want to ask you some more. Could we start with, do you have anything that you'd like to say by way of introduction, or should we get on with the questions, sir?
Well, let's just get on with the questions.
Thank you so much. One is that how do you perceive political Islam now working openly to agitate in the United States in these riots that we're seeing nationwide?
Well, the nice thing about Islam is it's very predictable. As a matter of fact, it can be predicted that no matter what the situation changes, if it's worse, they'll be able to take advantage of it. And they've been brilliant at this. This is just the very beginning of seeing the rise of Islamic power in demonstrations and on the street. If you don't believe it, look at the history of Beirut. By the way, Beirut used to be one of the nicest countries in the Middle East. Beirut was considered the Paris of the Mediterranean. And what brought it all down is they felt compassion. It was a Christian nation, and they felt compassion in their hearts for the poor Palestinians. And so they brought in the Palestinians. Now, the reason I bring this up is that once Islam comes in the street with violence, you'll know what real violence is. What we're seeing here is just a mere warm-up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you some of the questions that were brought by viewers of your previous programs. Can or could Islam become the one world government?
Well, certainly its doctrine says it should. When are you to fight? You are to fight until all the world lives under Sharia. So it's very clear that that is their doctrine. And it's a totalitarian doctrine, which means that the expansion of Islam must go into all areas of society. It's not enough just to have a Islamic government. Everything has to be Islamic. How the meat is killed and sold, how what is taught in schools. So we're just now beginning to see the rise of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How can we benefit today from the lessons Thomas Jefferson learned in dealing with the North African Muslims of his day?
Let me go back and say one more thing about the previous question.
Yes, sir.
Islam is totalitarian. This means that it has to fill all aspects of our life. This also means that it's simply not going to stop. So those who would like to make friends and mollify and compromise, you can't half-step your way to victory, particularly if the half-step is backwards. So we have to realize that now is the time to start digging our heels in and insisting on some aspects of our civilization must survive. Because when it's all over, the goal of the Sharia is to run everything. And we're just seeing they're taking advantage of these riots now, just flexing their muscles and developing their coexistence with the left.
And their political connections with the left and various groups, right? They're showing
Very much
themselves
so.
useful. Yeah. They're a useful ally, and the left may think that they can use Islam to its advantage, but in the end, Islam will dominate all the playing field, as it did in Turkey, didn't it?
Yes.
So do you think that as we're kind of poking the dragon, can't we benefit today from the lessons that Thomas Jefferson learned in dealing with the North African Muslims of his day?
Well, what did he do? Number one, he acquainted himself with the problem. The famous Jefferson Quran was purchased, not for his seeking to convert, but to understand the mind of his enemy. And we today do not know anything about the mind of our enemy. So we don't know who they are. Whether you're talking about law enforcement, whether you're talking about military, whether you're talking about church leaders, no matter who you're talking about, they know nothing about it. And they're willfully and deliberately ignorant. They seem to believe that if we just ignore it, the problem will go away. Well, I'm a 79-year-old man, and there are very few problems that will just go away if you ignore them, particularly problems such as this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Has the election of Talib and Ilhan Omar ironically helped in the effort to educate Americans on Islam and its tenets? What percent is good with their election and what percent is bad with their election?
I'm not sure I understand the percent thing, but what it does show us is that Muslims are going to be, we're going to have Muslims run so often for office that you don't even pay any attention to it anymore. I mean, this is simply coming. How do I know it's coming? Because CAIR has released the announcement that that's what they intend to do. I have a great respect for the Muslims and their ability to plan and work together to do things. As a matter of fact, if we could only do what Muslims do 1/10 as well, we'd win.
Mm-hmm.
So,
is it weaknesses in our political system that allow for this expansion into it? Our
no. It's not weaknesses in our political system. It's weakness in our voters.
Oh.
The media has convinced them that if you don't vote for a Muslim, then you're obvious an Islamophobe. So the problem is not Islam. If the problem were Islam, we could more easily fix it, but the problem is ourselves. For instance, we have something running around now called Black Lives Matter, and that seems to be the moral high ground. But I ask this, do Christian Black Lives matter? Well, it turns out no, Christian Black lives do not matter. You can kill Christians in Africa and the Middle East, and it's nobody who makes a note of it. Oh, there's occasional, I remember the thing where a bunch of Christian girls got kidnapped and Obama's wife put up the sign, something about free our women or something like that.
Yeah.
But holding up a cardboard sign is not going to get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to become strong in our own institutions.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I was in that part of Nigeria and the culture in the north. The groups poured into Nigeria, kidnapped some 200 black girls from sub-Saharan Black Africa, and then took them off. And it's a horrendous chapter in the expansion, but it shows you what what Islam is willing to do to expand itself. Anyway, that atrocity could be discussed at length another time, but there's big blind spots in terms of America's knowledge of history and historical fact. Agree on that. And pardon me.
Sorry about that. Let me
That's
disconnect this
fine.
as well.
Part of the excitement of a live interview.
Yes. I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. You're a busy man, and we appreciate you taking this time.
I'm a busy man who didn't do my homework. Shut off all the phones.
That's terrific. Well, so there goes another one.
Yeah, we took the battery out. I bet that solves it.
Let's hope.
If that doesn't solve it, I have a more interesting problem.
It's great to see when your face lights up with a smile. It's just tremendous. It's fantastic. So it's good to see you laughing.
Well, I have little to laugh about, unfortunately.
Well, can I ask you a lighthearted question?
Sure.
That's really on my mind. Speaking of laughter, you usually wear a bow tie for these interviews and presentations, and I'm wondering if you are a country gentleman to the extent that you actually know how to tie a bow tie, or do you cheat like me and use one of those little clip-ons, sir?
Do I look like a clip-on guy?
No, I don't think so.
No, I'm not.
No. That's tremendous. You know how to tie a bow tie.
By the way, bow ties are interesting. I think if you robbed a bank and just wore a bow tie and no face mask, they wouldn't be able to describe who you were at all, but he had on a bow tie. I've never seen such a small article of clothing stand out so much.
It's true. It worked for Tucker as well.
Yes. But I did it deliberately. My wife was in the film video business, and I was familiar with the fact that to succeed in Hollywood or in the video business, it helps if you have a look.
Yeah.
And so I wanted a look that would be observable even if you saw me on a TV screen across the room. And so I came up with the idea of a bow tie because it is a look. And for some reason, other people assume if you wear a bow tie, you're a little more intelligent than if you're not.
It gives you 10 free IQ points.
Yes.
Well, back to some serious matters. That was a good diversion, and people may have noticed that my phone went off here as well, so I stand corrected. I had the volume turned down, but I'll get back to that later. Hey, in terms of doing the education that you provide on the Center for the Study of Political Islam, with all the access that we have to information on sites such as yours and all of the lectures and all of the facts available, why do Americans remain so incredibly ignorant as to the basic tenets of political Islam and Islam itself?
I think fear. For instance, let's say that it used to be soon after September 11th, 2001, the attack on the World Trade Towers, you could bring up the subject of Islam and talk about it. But now then, people don't even want to talk about it because what has happened is I'm astounded how much calling people names will drive their behavior. You can call me anything you want and I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm going to do. I am not afraid of your bad words. But I've been disgusted to find out that Americans have become a nation of that if you just say, if you talk about that, I'm going to call you a bigot, and that's all they do, they'll shut up. Everybody's so afraid about being a bigot or a hater. Well, I hate child marriage. I hate abusive women. So I'm a hater. I'm glad to admit it. And yet today we don't have people who seem to be capable of being outraged by anything. Mm-hmm. We were just talking earlier about the rape of the kidnapping and rape of the girls in Nigeria. Why was there not a huge hue and cry out of the Christian community in this side of the world? Why wasn't there a huge hue and cry for the fact from the civil rights groups? So our basic problem, Wes, is we're no longer capable of moral outrage. We're no longer capable of righteous anger. And because we can't have righteous anger and we don't get angry, we say, oh, we're such good people. We're so tolerant.
Mm-hmm. And they reduce everyone to, oh dear, isn't that terrible? And then they just want to get back to their bread and circuses and their distractions from some real outrageous situations. Everyone's, been in, say for instance, you keep people in lockdown for 3 months and then suddenly stage these political protests. And we have not only Islamist political action groups, but leftist political action groups. And mayors are cooperating. Mayors, even public school teachers are cooperating with these protests. So everyone can go out and feel morally outraged. Well, my basic question is, say, look at the slave markets which exist today, the black men that are being sold and bought in slave markets today in Africa. And
by the way, you know what price they bring?
$40. What?
$40 to $50.
And and they're actually gelding some of the boys so that they'll be more subservient. These children and men are trafficked across the Sahara and brought into Libya. Open air slave markets now exist in this country, right? In Libya. So if Black Lives Matter, there's a little bit of work to be done over there in North Africa. Really, it's astonishing. I I'm going to have to call you back. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry,
Well,
sir. Sorry, sir. That was my uh, I'm doing some shopping for some elderly people in my life who are stuck, they're homebound because of the
right.
lockdown. So with my day off, my phone starts ringing and I have to do shopping for folks in grocery stores. So back to the point, sorry, but yeah, there's no moral outrage for the 29 Islamic republics where you can actually own slaves, or for the bride markets of North Africa where women are bought and sold, uh, either as younger, or they're older and they have children, and you get the whole slave family with the wife that you purchase. These things are not an outrage to the feminists. The modern feminists are concerned about using the correct pronoun, or having some clown, some drag queen bingo game at their church. So the focus is really bizarre. There's a lot of false flags going on. But did you have anything else you wanted to say about that question about why Americans remain so ignorant of the basic tenets of Islam, or have we?
To summarize, we're afraid.
Mhm.
We're afraid of knowledge because one man once told me, he says, Bill, your problem is this. You talk about a problem that people are afraid of, and they're afraid if they know about it, they'll be moral obligated to do something. So their ignorance is a cover. He said, it's like your best friend is married to the most beautiful woman in the world who's a billionaire, and you happen to know she's cheating on him. He does not want to know he's cheating because life is too good now. And
Mm-hmm.
and the facts of the matter would create suffering. So people
Mm-hmm.
want, they say ignorance is bliss. Well, I tell you this, we're all pretty blistered.
Well, that sort of fear and shame of being labeled as an Islamophobe, or a misogynist, or a sexist. That sort of fear is incredibly effective in a state like Minnesota, where guilt is always good and very useful for passive aggressive tendencies that people in Minnesota use to keep other people under control. It's a Nordic village cultural value that we have writ large in the state of Minnesota. It's fascinating. But let's go on to another question. Is Islamic dualism hard for Americans to understand? Why? Well, first of all, I guess we should talk about what is Islamic dualism. But what is it about the American mind that renders the American mind incapable of understanding Islamic dualism?
Well, let's go over what dualism is. One of the things that is apparent to any reader of the Quran is it is contradictory. You have your religion and I have mine. Sounds very tolerant. But then there are other verses which say that you can be killed if you don't believe the way Muhammad did. So that's the problem. We have what I call good stuff and bad stuff. Now, what people want to do is they want to neglect and deny the bad stuff and just believe the good stuff. But here's the problem. There are 3 verses in the Quran which say if there's a contradictory verse in the Quran, the latter verse is stronger than the earlier verse. Notice it does not say the earlier verse is wrong. It just says that the latter verse is stronger. So therefore, both are there for easy availability. We also have the fact that in Muhammad's life, there are 2 Qurans, a Quran written in Mecca and a Quran written in Medina, and they're very, very different from each other. Anyone can learn if I gave you a cheat sheet and worked with you for 15 or 20 minutes, you could take a random verse out of the Quran, look at my cheat sheet and go, oh, this was written in Mecca. It's that easy.
Mm.
So, but not only is the Quran, 2 Qurans, early and late, but we have 2 Muhammads. An early Muhammad who was a religious teacher. There was no jihad. He preached the religion of Islam in Mecca for 13 years, and converted about 150 people. That's about 10 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Then he went to Medina, where he became a politician and a warlord. And this is clearly laid out. These are not my words or terms. And then when he died, 10 years later, all of Arabia was Islamic. So we have 2 Muhammads. We have the peaceful, good Muhammad, and who we wouldn't mind for a neighbor next door. Then we had Muhammad, the jihadist, who Trust me, you did not want to live next door to him because Muhammad attacked every single neighbor that he had. So there's two Muhammads, there's two Qurans, and I lump all of these under the heading of dualism. That is, there's always two stories. Now then, the unique thing about this, if you're a Westerner, you go, well, you want to ask the question, well, which one is right? No, they are both right at the same time. You use the one you need. It's like having hot water and cold water. Is the hot water more real than the cold water? No.
That's tremendous. So the Muhammad that you see in the Lutheran Church, the Muhammad that you see in the welcomed to the Methodist Church or the Unitarian Universalist Church, that Muhammad is actually different from the Muhammad that might be found at the Abu Bakr al-Siddiq Mosque, the one that's being spoken of that we're not allowed to see or hear actually what's transpiring. The interfaith political dialogues are always taking place on the other front. Those interfaith dialogues are never inside the mosque. That itself is a physical dualism. It's the hot and cold water coming out of the same tap, but dualistic.
Yes. Dualism allows Islam to be anything it wants to be. And I remind you that the shortest hadith is, war is deceit. And Islam is extraordinarily good at deceit. As a matter of fact, one of the verses in the Quran, Allah says that I'm the greatest deceiver, which is struck me as a strange thing.
Yeah. Strange because who would worship a deceiver?
Yes.
Who would choose to love such a God and follow a God that tells you that the God says that it is a deceiver, and then someone still chooses to follow that God?
Well, Islam is about power. And so if you become a Muslim, you become a more powerful person. And this is just one of the manifestations of power.
With all of the privileges assigned to the certain community, it's easy to see how they're becoming more powerful. And the disaffected of our society seem to be buying into that right now as well and following along while Islam pays for the posters. I like seeing the little logo in the upper hand corner of some of the posters, very professionally produced posters by a certain group. We have really had a good conversation. Let's get on to the next question, sir. Why are feminists so silent on Islam? I suppose that ties into the other questions, but why nothing from the feminists?
Well, they're just like everyone else. They're just like the ministers. They do not want, if you talk about what's wrong with women in Islam, then you're going to be called an Islamophobe. Well, people would rather die than be called a bad name. Although no one can really seem to define what an Islamophobe is, they don't want to be one. They don't want to be called a raider, a racist, a hater, and a bigot. So therefore, they're silent. FGM, how bad does it have to get as a feminist before you would say, that's wrong? But FGMs, well, those are just cultural differences.
Yes, sir. You know that
you can beat your wife. Well, those are just cultural differences. Those are tribal qualities. No, beating your wife is from a verse in the Quran. It's not tribal. So why do we allow this to happen? Why do we allow that they can have a verse that you can beat your wife and feminists are not outraged by it? I mean, here's God himself saying you can beat your wife.
Yeah, God himself providing detailed instructions on the exact method, the ferocity, the location where the beating should occur on her body. It's all discussed. It's codified within the Sharia.
Yes.
How to beat a woman.
And yet our feminists just go, you talking to me?
Yeah. When I was a much younger man, I was walking on the streets in an Islamic country, and I found a group of 20 to 25 boys beating a woman on the ground. And I foolishly stepped up in my broken Arabic, and I said, gentlemen, I said, descendants of the Prophet, is this written of in the Quran? Is this the way you should treat a woman? And because I didn't know the Quran well enough at that age, but I broke up the fight, and they stopped beating her, at least for while I was still there. But now that I've done further study, I realized that my question was pretty foolish, because I was actually reminding them that, yeah, you know what? Actually, it is in the Quran. You can do this.
Well, I think that's reserved for your wife and daughter. But anyway,
Yeah, that's
there was
true.
about 20 years ago, there was a case in a Sharia court in Palestine, what's called Palestine by the Palestinians. And it was, the woman brought a lawsuit against her husband. He says, my husband beats me every day. I want a judgment from the jury here that he can only beat me once a week.
Oh, that's all she was asking for.
Just beat me once a week. But what does this tell you about her mind?
Mm.
What does this tell you about the world that she lives in? She lives in a world where she has become completely subjugated. Now, you would think this would be offensive to feminists, but nope, we're not going to talk about that at all.
You mentioned female genital mutilation earlier. Um, um, there were 4 Democrats in Minnesota who voted against Minnesota State Representative Mary Franson's anti-female genital mutilation bill, and one of them was Tina Liebling from my own city here in Rochester. And when I called her on the phone to ask her, as a Democrat and a woman, why would you vote, basically for female genital mutilation, the reply was, it's a cultural practice. And all 4 Democrats, 3 of the 4 were women who voted against that bill. And Bly is the only male. Bly comes from an extremely liberal. Representative Bly is from Northfield, Minnesota, and the other 2 Democrats were more urban Democrats. But it's astonishing to me that we can be so afraid of, By the way, is it okay if it's cultural? Does that make it okay?
That's the other thing. Isn't it interesting? Multiculturalism says that all cultures are equally valid. But let me ask you this. If they're all equally valid, why do we have as many people migrating into Haiti as we do into Florida? Why is it that Muslims, when they want to immigrate somewhere, don't want to immigrate to Saudi Arabia? Why is it it's always here they want? So if you have a PhD in sociology, you can believe in multiculturalism. But if you're a man trying to make a living and get a better place to live, you don't believe that crap at all.
No, that's exactly true. One more political aspect of what you said. There's another law that and this is political Islam on the defense a little bit and being exposed here in Minnesota. In this session, a law finally passed making child marriage illegal. So it's banning child marriage. But I think that that's really just going to drive it to the mosque, because that's where marriage truly takes place anyway in the Islamic mind. It's similar to Mormonism, where there's a spiritual marriage, but there's at least making it illegal to have a child bride. But by the way, why do we need such a law in Minnesota? We didn't really talk about the cause that led to the effect. We're not allowed to discuss Islam as a causation of the necessity of passing such a law that would make child marriage illegal. And so I'm really, there again is the dualism, where you can separate make the cause and the effect. It's truly bizarre to me. And you said something earlier about political Islam and its dualism. We also forget that, and multiculturalism. In terms of multiculturalism, we Westerners don't remember that what's today known as the Arabian Peninsula was once filled with a plethora of cultural groups. There were many religious groups. There were Zoroastrians, there were Buddhists, there were Hindus, there were Christians, there were Jews living on what's today known as the Arabian Peninsula or Saudi Arabia. All of that multiculturalism is gone. All of that diversity is gone. Why the lack of historical knowledge? Well, Americans are thinking about tomorrow, I guess, rather than the past. And so we're destined to repeat it. Can I ask you one more question on our list? And that's Americans have an unconstitutional God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Islamic right to life is conditional. One must believe in Allah and submit to Islam, or you have no right to life. Why isn't this fact first and foremost in the Islamic discussion? Isn't it treasonous to Islam? Isn't it treasonous to permit Islam into our country, to serve in the government? This question is getting too long, but I think you get the gist of it, right? Sorry.
The place to deal with Muslim candidates is not after well, you can deal with them after they've been elected. You need to constantly be asking them the question about their own doctrine. In the Quran, it says, verse 434, that you can beat your wife. Do you confirm? Do you agree with this, or do you deny? Or do you disagree with it? Is this verse right or wrong? So we need to hold their feet to the fire on their doctrine, and not do you practice it or don't practice it, but how do you feel about the fact that it exists at all? Is this a good verse or a bad verse? Should we use it? Should I start using it in my house? Or is it only you can use it in your house? So we need to start dealing with candidates when they're running for office to put their feet to the fire of supporting their own Islam, because it is not a personal thing. I've known many Muslims. I used to be a college professor, and they're just like everybody else, at least in the social milieu that I worked in. So it's not about person. It's about what your doctrine is that you're going to represent. You're supposed to defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States. That's part of every oath that you take, even if you're just a mayor. How do you fulfill that? When, for instance, we have freedom of religion, and yet under Islam, apostates can be killed or persecuted. Which do you stand for? Our First Amendment or your Sharia amendment? So we need to do this. But to do it, we need to have groups to work together. It's very unusual to find people who can work on their own. There's so few of them, it doesn't really matter. And besides that, warriors never defeat armies. So you can be a Robert Spencer, but you will never defeat Islam. But CAIR can defeat the United States. That is, it's a group. So we need to have groups that work together. If we want to hold up Muslims to their doctrine and ask them whether they adhere to it or not, we need to have groups that we work with. Otherwise, the job won't get done. We'll just stay at home and worry and fuss. So it starts with organization, and that's where we're extremely weak. We have individuals who are courageous, such as yourself, but we need groups who are courageous, not just individuals.
That's absolutely right. It's the group. And we certainly have enough groups watching us, I mean, such as the SPLC, which to me stands for Stop Politicizing Legitimate Concerns.
I know a lot about the SPLC.
I'm afraid I'm going to find out a lot more too in my future, but I'm too old to care at this point, as you are as well. And what difference does it make if we don't fall? You know, if we're going to fall, let's at least fall forward on our swords. Because
right.
I have a lot of positive things to say about Islamic cultures that I've lived in terms of the beauty of architecture or the beauty of carvings, the artwork, some clothing, designs. There's actually some interesting poetry. And my life was saved by some Muslims before. So I can say some really positive things about Muslims. And I don't think that takes away from any of the criticisms that we can make about political Islam. We should be allowed to have this conversation because, after all, Christianity has been completely dissected by the leftist cultural Marxists who have a kind of approach to deconstructing our religion, Christianity.
They don't touch Islam.
Never. If they applied the same tools to Islam, it would be done in short order.
But they refuse to do this. They want to be nice. Yeah. Most Christians, in particular Christian leadership, have reduced the entire Bible down to 2 syllables. Be nice, be nice, be nice.
And there's no consequences for criticizing Christianity. It's just not edgy. It's not, you know, it's not a big deal to swear in the name of the Lord or the name of God. If you really want to get some consequences, try swearing in the name of Muhammad, because you'll end up sitting in a workshop on sensitivity.
I would that would give me a rash. Actually, it would throw me out of the class because I would keep asking questions.
They would throw you out of the class, like the time I met Professor Todd Green accidentally at an after church seminar that he was hosting in one of our local churches. And I kept asking questions, and I had the group laughing. I had the group in laughter. They actually had to end the session. It was and I didn't even know who the guy was. And I actually asked him at one point, have you ever lived in an Islamic state? Do you
What did he
really?
say?
He was dumbstruck. He didn't say anything. But the ladies, the good church ladies who had coordinated the event, quickly started saying, well, that's all we have time for today. We're going to...
Cowards.
I just thought we were having a fireside chat after church about Islam. I wandered into that situation. I didn't intend to light a fire. But, you know, let's mention again your website, the Center for the Study of Political Islam. You can find books and tracts, and you can find connections to all Dr. Werner's social media, Facebook, Twitter feed, etc. All of the good places where you can go to arm yourself with some facts about the real nature of political Islam and how it subjugated civilizations for 1400 years. That's politicalislam.com. And Dr. Werner, I just have to thank you for a fascinating conversation today. Conversation's a lost art, and I thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome. Glad to help, Wes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sir. Thank you so much.